When I was on a business trip, my stepmom called and said, "I sold your $1 million bakery for just $750, your mother's dream bakery, and also drained your bank account. Tomorrow, the new owner will take over the office." I rushed back the next morning, and when I arrived at the office, I could not stop laughing because the bakery she sold was actually— I always believed Maple Street Bakery would be mine one day. It wasn't just a business, it was my mother's dream. Something she built with her bare hands, fueled by passion, hard work, and an unshakable belief in creating something meaningful. Some of my fondest childhood memories are of standing on a stool beside her, my hands covered in flour, as she patiently taught me how to knead dough. She used to say, "A bakery isn't just about food, Chloe. It's about love. It's about making people feel at home." But life has a cruel way of taking things away. When my mother passed away, it felt like the world had lost its color. My father, Robert, was shattered, barely able to function. I was only 20, grieving but determined to keep my mother's legacy alive. I spent every waking hour at the bakery, helping the employees, ensuring that things ran the way she would have wanted. But then, Victoria entered our lives, a woman who seemed perfect at first. She was kind, warm, and understanding, and my father, desperate for companionship, fell in love with her quickly. Within 2 years, they were married, and she moved into our home, bringing along her daughter, Chloe. Yes, Chloe, we shared the same name, but we couldn't have been more different. She was spoiled, entitled, and had never worked for anything in her life. From the moment they arrived, everything started changing. At first, I tried to be welcoming. I wanted to believe that we could be a family. But it didn't take long for me to realize Victoria had an agenda. She slowly began asserting herself into the bakery, making changes without asking, acting as if it were hers. She talked to customers as if she had been there from the start, making subtle comments about how the business needed modernization and new leadership. My father, blinded by love and eager to please her, allowed it. The final blow came when I graduated from college and told my father that I wanted to run the bakery full-time. Victoria laughed. "Oh, Chloe, you have a whole finance career ahead of you. Why waste it baking bread?" My father, who once shared my mother's dream, agreed with her. I left that night. I took a job in corporate finance, moved away to New York, and threw myself into my work. Every time I visited home, the bakery felt less and less like my mother's and more like Victoria's. I tried not to care, told myself that maybe it was for the best, that I needed to let go. But deep down, I knew I was just trying to avoid the pain. Then, last week, everything changed. I was on a business trip in Chicago when my phone rang. Victoria. I hadn't spoken to her in months. "Chloe, I just wanted to let you know. I sold the bakery." I nearly dropped my phone. "What?" My voice was barely above a whisper. "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she said, her tone smug. "It was struggling anyway. Your mother's little passion project was bleeding money. It was time to move on." I felt my entire body tense with rage. "You had no right." She chuckled. "Oh, but I did. The paperwork went through last month. Tomorrow, the new owner takes over. It's done." And just like that, she hung up. I sat frozen in my hotel room, my mind racing. How could she sell my mother's bakery? How had my father let this happen? My heart pounded as I grabbed my laptop and started searching for business records. And that's when I found it. The bakery had been sold to a real estate investor named Mark Reynolds for $750,000. But something felt off. Victoria had always been manipulative, but this didn't make sense. My father never mentioned the sale. There was no message, no warning, nothing. I scrolled through the documents again and felt my stomach drop. The sale had my signature on it. But I never signed anything. I booked the first flight home. By the time I landed in Seattle the next morning, I was running on nothing but pure adrenaline. I barely stopped to breathe as I drove straight to the bakery. My mind was filled with questions, but one thing was clear. Victoria had gone too far this time. I stormed through the doors, expecting to see a stranger sitting in my mother's old office, taking over what was meant to be mine. But what I found made me stop dead in my tracks. The bakery was still operating. Employees were still working, customers still walking in, the scent of fresh bread still filling the air. Something wasn't right. I walked straight to the back office, ready to demand answers. And when I opened the door, I saw something that made me laugh, not from joy, but from pure disbelief. The bakery was still mine. Victoria had sold something that wasn't even hers to sell. And now she was going to pay for it. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the documents on the desk. The contract, the signatures. My name was scrawled at the bottom in perfect cursive. Except I never signed it. My heart pounded. My hands shook. But then, something strange happened. I laughed. Not out of humor, but out of sheer disbelief. Victoria really thought she could get away with this? That she could just forge my name, sell my mother's bakery, and I'd never notice? I took a deep breath and tried to focus. I needed answers. Now. I stormed out of the office and made my way home, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they ached. My father's house, the house I grew up in, looked the same, but everything inside felt different now. I found him in the kitchen, reading the newspaper like it was just another morning. "Dad," I said, my voice sharp. "Did you know Victoria sold the bakery?" He looked up confused. "Of course." She said it was struggling. It was time to move on. My stomach twisted. He had no idea. "Did you know she forged my signature to do it?" His face paled. "What?" I dropped the contract onto the table in front of him. "Look at this. My name is on it. But I never signed it." He picked up the papers, his hands trembling. I watched his face as he scanned the document, the realization sinking in. "She told me you agreed," he murmured. "She said you didn't want anything to do with it." I clenched my fists. That was a lie. And she's been lying to you for years. Just then, we heard footsteps. Victoria walked into the kitchen, holding her coffee cup like nothing was wrong. When she saw me, she smirked. "Oh, Chloe," she said sweetly. "You're back." "Cut the act," I snapped. "You forged my signature. You stole my mother's bakery. And now you're going to pay for it." She sighed dramatically, setting down her coffee. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. The bakery was failing. I did what was best for this family." "For you and Chloe, you mean?" I shot back. She didn't even flinch. "Your father agreed." I turned to him, desperate for him to stand up for me. "Dad, tell me you didn't know about this." He still looked stunned, like the world around him was crumbling. I didn't know about the forgery," he admitted. "I thought you signed the papers. I thought you didn't care anymore." Victoria smiled, pleased with herself. "See? No harm done." I gritted my teeth. "You stole my mother's dream and sold it like it was nothing. You lied to my father. And on top of that, I'm willing to bet you've been stealing money from the business for years." For the first time, Victoria's expression faltered. I knew I had her, and I wasn't done. "I checked the records," I continued. "The bakery was making a profit. So tell me, Victoria, where did the money go?" Silence. Chloe, my stepsister, suddenly walked into the room, her phone in hand. "Mom, what's going on?" She took one look at the contract, the tension in the room, and scoffed. "Oh my God, are we really doing this?" "Chloe, move on. It's just a bakery." My fury exploded. "That was my mother's legacy," I hissed. "Not some toy for you and your mother to sell when it's convenient. And if you think I'm just going to walk away, you don't know me at all." Chloe rolled her eyes. "Whatever." I turned back to Victoria. "I've already spoken to Lisa Romero. You remember her, right? She's a lawyer now. And guess what? Forgery is a crime." Victoria finally looked nervous. "You wouldn't." I smiled. "Oh, I absolutely would." She tried to recover, straightening her back. "Mark Reynolds already paid for the bakery. You can't undo the sale." "Actually," I said, holding up my phone, "Mark and I had a little chat this morning. Turns out he doesn't like being scammed. And since you sold him something you had no right to sell, the contract is invalid." Victoria's face turned white. I wasn't done. "You're not just losing the bakery," I said. "You're going to jail for fraud." The panic in her eyes was priceless. Chloe, be reasonable. Reasonable? I laughed. You stole from me. You lied to my father. You tried to erase my mother's dream. And now, you're finally going to face the consequences. Chloe stepped forward, eyes wide. Mom? Victoria grabbed her purse. I need to make some calls. No, I said sharply. You need to get a lawyer. Because this wasn't over. Not even close. Victoria stormed out of the kitchen, Chloe right behind her, whispering something frantically. My father sat frozen, still holding the papers, his hands shaking. I could see the realization sinking in. He had been deceived, manipulated for years, and now everything was unraveling. But I didn't have time to console him. Not yet. I grabbed my keys and drove straight to Lisa Romero's office. She was already expecting me, her sharp brown eyes scanning the forged contract as I handed it over. This is bad, she said, flipping through the documents. She didn't just forge your signature, Chloe. She fabricated financial losses to justify the sale. That's fraud. I knew it, I muttered. And there's more, Lisa continued, pulling up bank records on her laptop. I did some digging last night. Over the past 5 years, Victoria has been draining money from the bakery's accounts. Small amounts at first, but it adds up. Close to $200,000 redirected to a personal account under her name. I felt my blood boil. So she's been stealing from my mother's bakery this whole time? Lisa nodded. And she used that money to make it look like the business was failing. She set this up long before she sold it. The pieces clicked together in my head. Victoria had been planning this for years. She had manipulated my father, pushed me out, and slowly bled the business dry, waiting for the right moment to sell. But what she hadn't counted on was me coming back. I exhaled sharply. What do we do now? Lisa leaned back, tapping her fingers against the desk. We go after her. Legally. If Mark Reynolds is willing to support the case, we have everything we need: fraud, embezzlement, forgery. She won't just lose the sale, Chloe. She could face prison time. I didn't hesitate. Do it. Lisa smirked. I thought you'd say that. An hour later, I was standing outside Maple Street Bakery, staring at the building that had once felt like home. It still smelled the same: warm bread, cinnamon, vanilla. But it wasn't mine anymore. Not yet. I stepped inside, ignoring the confused looks from the employees. They had probably heard Victoria's version of events. Where's Mark Reynolds? I asked one of the staff members. The young woman hesitated before pointing toward the office. He's in there, but Victoria was just here talking to him. Of course, she was trying to cover her tracks. I didn't bother knocking. I pushed the door open and found Mark sitting behind the desk, flipping through more paperwork. Victoria was standing across from him, her face red, clearly trying to convince him of something. When she saw me, she froze. I smiled. Oh, don't stop on my account. Mark sighed, rubbing his temples. Chloe, I was just about to call you. I walked in, keeping my eyes locked on Victoria. I bet you were. Victoria cleared her throat, trying to regain control. Mark, don't listen to her. She's trying to create drama. The sale is final. I pulled out my phone and held up the bank statements Lisa had given me. Mark, did she tell you she's been stealing money from the bakery for years? Or that she forged my signature to sell you something she had no legal right to sell? Mark's eyes flicked to the phone screen, his jaw tightening. Is this real? Victoria scoffed. Oh, come on. This is ridiculous. I placed the forged contract on his desk. It's very real. And if you go through with the sale, you'll be involved in a fraud case. Is that something you want? His expression darkened. He turned to Victoria. You told me everything was legitimate. Victoria blanched. It is. She's just. I already spoke to my lawyer. I cut in. And she's filing charges as we speak. You're done, Victoria. For the first time, fear flashed across her face. She turned to Mark, desperate now. This is a misunderstanding. We can fix this. Mark stood up. You lied to me. This deal is off. Victoria took a step back, shaking her head. No, you can't just. I can, he snapped. And I will. Because I don't do business with frauds. I watched as reality hit her. Her entire plan had collapsed. She had nothing left. Leave, Mark said firmly. Now. Victoria glared at me, hatred burning in her eyes. But she knew she had no choice. She turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Mark ran a hand through his hair. I should have done better research before making the deal. I shook my head. You weren't the one scamming people. That's on her. He nodded. I'll have my lawyer send over the paperwork to reverse the sale. The bakery is yours again, Chloe. The words hit me like a wave. Mine. I had done it, but I wasn't finished yet. Victoria might have lost the bakery, but I wasn't about to let her walk away unpunished. She had stolen from me, lied to my father, and almost destroyed everything my mother built. Now it was her turn to pay. I left Mark's office feeling lighter, but I wasn't done yet. Victoria had taken so much from me, from my father, from the business my mother built with love. Just because I had the bakery back didn't mean she could walk away unscathed. She needed to face the consequences. When I got home, I found my father sitting at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. The papers I had left with him were still there, scattered across the table like shattered pieces of a truth. He looked up at me, his eyes tired and full of something I hadn't seen before, shame. I should have seen it, he murmured. I should have known. I pulled out a chair and sat down across from him. You trusted her, Dad. That's not your fault. But now you know the truth. He sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. I let her turn me against you. I let her take everything your mother built. I don't even know how to fix this. I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. We start by making sure she doesn't get away with it. His gaze sharpened. What do you mean? I leaned forward, my voice steady. Lisa has already filed charges for fraud and embezzlement. Victoria could be facing serious legal trouble. And I'm not backing down. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then finally he nodded. I'll support whatever you need to do. It was the first time in years I felt like my father was truly on my side again. Just then, the front door slammed open. Victoria. She stormed in, her face twisted in rage. Chloe trailed behind her, looking anxious, her phone clutched tightly in her hands. You, Victoria spat, pointing a manicured finger at me. You think you've won? I folded my arms. I don't think. I know. Her eyes darted to my father. Robert, are you really going to let her do this to me? After everything I've done for this family? My father stood up, his voice firm. You didn't do anything for this family, Victoria. You used us. You stole from my daughter. You lied to me. And now you're going to pay for it. Victoria laughed, but it was hollow. You think I'm just going to roll over and let you ruin my life? No, I said, tilting my head. I think you already did that yourself. She turned to Chloe, desperation in her voice. Sweetheart, say something. Tell them this is all a mistake. Chloe shifted uncomfortably. Mom, she hesitated. I didn't know about the money. Victoria's eyes widened. Are you seriously turning against me? Chloe shook her head. I don't want to be involved in this. That was the thing about people like Victoria. They taught their children selfishness, and then were shocked when that selfishness wasn't in their favor. I pulled out my phone and hit play on a recording. Victoria's voice filled the room. It was struggling anyway, Chloe. Your mother's little passion project was bleeding money. It was time to move on. Victoria froze. I recorded our phone call, I said calmly. And I sent it to the lawyer. Along with the bank records. Along with the proof of forgery. Along with the fraudulent financial reports you submitted before the sale. Victoria's face turned white. This is checkmate, I continued. Lisa just confirmed. The police have the evidence now. You might want to start packing your things, because I doubt you'll be staying here much longer. You can't do this, she hissed, voice shaking. I built this family. No, my father interrupted. You tore it apart. Chloe took a step back, shaking her head. I need to go. She bolted out the door, leaving her mother standing alone, surrounded by the wreckage she had caused. For once, Victoria had nothing to say. The silence stretched between us before she let out a bitter laugh. "You think you're better than me?" I met her gaze.
No.
"But I'm not a liar. I'm not a thief. And I don't destroy people to get what I want." She turned to my father, making one last desperate attempt. "Robert, please. I love you." He shook his head. "I don't believe you." With that, he turned away. That was the end of it. Victoria packed up and left that night, but not before the police came knocking the next morning. Fraud charges don't just disappear, and Lisa made sure every piece of evidence was airtight. Victoria wasn't getting out of this one. As for Chloe, she texted me once, a single message I didn't know. I didn't respond, because she had known enough. The bakery was mine again, but it wasn't just about ownership. It was about taking back what was stolen. It was about restoring something my mother built and refusing to let her dream be erased. My father and I stood in the middle of the shop a few days later, watching as employees bustled around, kneading dough, frosting cakes, breathing life back into the place. "She would be proud of you," my father said softly. I blinked back, the sting in my eyes. "I hope so." He put an arm around my shoulders. "I know so." For the first time in years, I felt like things were right again. Victoria had tried to erase me. She had tried to take everything from me. But in the end, she lost everything. And I won.